Good morning and good afternoon, RSGA and participating STEM classes. Today we're going to learn about one of the most amazing scientists in American history. His name, George Washington Carver. He was a chemist, botanist, and inventor who revolutionized agriculture and helped transform the South. His discoveries are still used today to feed the world and protect our environment. Let's explore his incredible journey. George Washington Carver was born around 1864 in Diamond, Missouri, during a very difficult time in American history, the Civil War. He was born into slavery, which means he and his mother Mary were enslaved people owned by white farmers named Moses Carver. When George was just a baby, something terrible happened. Raiders kidnapped him and his mother to sell them. Although baby George was rescued and returned to the Carver family, his mother was never seen again. George's father had died before he was born, so Moses and Susan Carver raised George and his brother, giving them the Carver surname. Even though slavery ended after the Civil War, life was still very difficult for African Americans, especially in the South. But George was determined to learn and make something of his life. George wasn't a strong child, so he couldn't do the heavy farm work that his brother did. Instead, he helped with household chores and worked in the garden. This turned out to be a blessing in disguise. As George spent time with plants, he developed an incredible understanding of how they grow and what they needed to be healthy. He would explore the woods around the farm, collecting plant specimens and learning everything he could about them. Pretty soon, neighboring farmers started calling him the plant doctor because he could figure out what was wrong with the sick plants and how to heal them. George's love for plants and his hunger for knowledge were so strong that at age 12, he left home to attend one-room schoolhouse in southwest Missouri, beginning his journey towards becoming a scientist. George's educational path wasn't easy either. He faced discrimination and poverty, but he never gave up. He moved from school to school, sometimes walking for miles and working odd jobs to pay for his education. He first attended Simpson College in Iowa, where he studied art and music. His teacher noticed his interest in plants and encouraged him to study botany, the study or the science of plants. So George transferred to Iowa State Agriculture College, which is now called Iowa State University. At Iowa State, George excelled in his studies, and he earned a bachelor's degree in agriculture science in 1894, and then continued his education and earned a master's degree in 1896. This was a huge achievement. George Washington Carver became the first African American in the United States to earn a graduate degree in scientific agriculture. While at Iowa State, he showed a special talent for identifying plant diseases and finding ways to treat them. This skill would prove incredibly important for his future work. In 1896, George received a letter that would change his life. It was from Booker T. Washington, who founded Tuskegee Institute in Alabama, a school for African American students. Washington wanted Carver to come teach and lead the new agriculture department. The salary wasn't good as what Carver would have earned elsewhere, but Carver saw this as a chance to help, quote, his people. To use science and to improve the lives of poor black farmers in the South. George Washington Carver accepted the position and spent the next 47 years at Tuskegee Institute. He established the Agriculture's Experiment Station, where he would conduct the research that would change American agriculture forever. When Carver arrived in Alabama, he saw a serious problem. For decades, Southern farmers had been growing mainly one crop, cotton. Some also grew tobacco. While cotton made a lot of money when sold, it had devastating effects on the soil. You see, cotton plants have shallow roots that require huge amounts of nutrients from the soil, especially nitrogen. Year after year of growing cotton in the same field stripped the soil of these nutrients. The soil becomes depleted, which means used up and exhausted. This led to terrible soil erosion, where the wind and rain would actually wash away the topsoil. Farmers were trapped in a difficult situation. Their land was producing less and less cotton each year, but they didn't know what else to grow. Many farmers, especially poor African American sharecroppers, were stuck in cycles of poverty and debt. Carver knew that science could solve the problem, specifically the science of chemistry and botany working together. Carver's solution was brilliant yet simple. It was crop rotation. This is a farming technique where you plant different types of crops in the same field across different growing seasons or years. Here's how it worked. Instead of planting cotton every single year, Carver taught farmers to plant cotton one year, then plant peanuts or sweet potatoes the next year, then go back to cotton. Why did this work so well? It's all about chemistry. Different plants need different nutrients from the soil. Cotton takes nitrogen out of the soil, but certain plants, called legumes like peanuts and soybeans, actually put nitrogen back into the soil. Sweet potatoes help enrich the soil. When farmers rotated their crops, the peanuts and sweet potatoes restored the nitrogen that the cotton had removed. This meant they were able to plant cotton again. The soil was healthy, it was nutrient rich, producing much better yields. Plus, crop rotation also prevents plant disease and reduces pests because different crops attract different insects and diseases. This wasn't just a theory. Carver proved it worked through careful experiments at the Agriculture Experiment Station. He conducted soil studies and kept detailed records of crop yields. The results were amazing. Farmers who used crop rotation saw their cotton harvest increase dramatically. Let's zoom in on the chemistry behind why peanuts are so special. Peanuts are legumes, and legumes have a superpower that most plants don't have. On the roots of peanut plants, there are tiny bumps called root nodules. Inside these nodules live a special bacteria called rhizobia. These bacteria can do something incredible. They can take nitrogen gas from the air in the soil and convert it into a form that plants use as food. This process is called nitrogen fixation and is one of nature's most important chemical reactions. When peanut plants die and decompose, or when the roots break down in the soil, all that nitrogen they created becomes available for the next crop, like cotton. It's like a natural fertilizer factory right within the ground. Carver chose peanuts for Alabama farmers because they were easy to grow. They thrived in Alabama's climate, and they had these amazing nitrogen-fixing properties. Sweet potatoes, while not nitrogen fixers like peanuts, are also excellent for soil health and were perfect for Alabama's soil conditions. Carver didn't just tell farmers what to plant. He was a true scientist who used chemistry to understand exactly what was happening in the soil and in the plants. In his chemistry laboratory at Tuskegee, Carver conducted experiments where he would separate plants into their chemical components. He would extract the fats, oils, gums, resins, and sugars from peanuts and other crops. By understanding the chemical makeup of these plants, he could figure out new ways to use them. Carver also developed natural alternatives to expensive chemical products. He taught farmers how to use fertilizer from swamp muck and compost instead of buying expensive chemical fertilizers. He showed them how to make natural pesticides from plants. One of his practical inventions was the Jessup wagon, which he designed in 1906. This was basically a mobile laboratory on wheels, a wagon filled with equipment and samples that Carver would drive to different farms. He would demonstrate his techniques right there in the fields, making science accessible to farmers who might never step foot in a traditional laboratory. Now here's where Carver's work gets really exciting. Farmers who followed his advice about crop rotation started growing lots of peanuts and sweet potatoes. But then they had a new problem. What should they do with all these peanuts? At the time, not many people ate them, and there weren't many uses for them. So Carver went to work in his chemistry lab. Over the years, he developed more than 300 products made from peanuts. Let me tell you about some of them. For food, he created peanut milk, peanut butter, peanut flour, cooking oil, peanut coffee, mayonnaise, and even peanut ice cream. Ooh, peanut ice cream. That sounds marvelous. For industry, he developed peanut-based plastics, different colors of dyes and paints, printing ink, wood stain, soap, and even a type of gasoline. He created cosmetics for face powder and shampoo, insecticides to kill crop-damaging bugs, and industrial products like axle grease for machines. By creating all these uses for peanuts, Carver helped create entirely new markets. Farmers could then sell their peanuts to many different people for different purposes, not just food. This greatly improved the economy of the South. Peanuts, however, weren't Carver's only focus. He developed over 100 uses for sweet potatoes, including flour for baking, vinegar, writing ink, and dyes of many different colors. He found uses for soybeans and pecans, too. During World War I, when the United States couldn't get certain dyes from Europe anymore, Carver stepped up to help. He developed more than 500 different shades of dye from Alabama clay soils. He also worked with the famous inventor Henry Ford on finding alternatives to rubber and gasoline. In 1942, Carver and Ford successfully created a rubber substitute using the goldenrod plant. Through his life, Carver published bulletins, simple free pamphlets filled with practical information, recipes, and farming techniques. These bulletins were distributed to farmers for free and were written in an easy-to-understand language. He believed that scientific knowledge should be accessible to everyone, especially poor farmers who needed it the most. Now, you might be thinking, that sounds great and all, but that was over 100 years ago. How does Carver's work matter today? Well, that's an interesting subject. George Washington Carver's discoveries are more important now than ever. Crop rotation is now a standard practice in agriculture around the world. Farmers everywhere use the same principles Carver taught, alternating crops to maintain soil health. It's a cornerstone of what we call sustainable agriculture. Carver's methods are fundamental to organic farming. Organic farmers avoid synthetic chemicals and instead use natural methods to enrich soil and control pests, exactly what Carver advocated. His work is also the foundation of regenerative agriculture, which is experiencing a revival today. Regenerative agriculture goes beyond just sustaining the soil. It actually rebuilds and improves soil health over time. This is exactly what Carver was doing more than a century ago. Even the idea of community-supported agriculture, or CSA, where people buy shares of a farm's harvest, connects back to Carver's legacy. One of his students, Booker T. Whatley, built upon Carver's crop rotation principles and created what we now call the CSA model. George Washington Carver died on January 5th, 1943, after falling down the stairs in his home. He was about 78 years old. He was buried next to Booker T. Washington at Tuskegee University. Even though Carver lived simply and saved most of his money, he donated all $60,000 of his life savings to establish the George Washington Carver Foundation to support future agricultural research. Franklin D. Roosevelt said after his death, "All mankind are beneficiaries of his discoveries in the field of agricultural chemistry. The things which he believed in the face of early handicaps will for all time afford an aspiring example to youth everywhere." End quote. In 1943, Carver's childhood became the George Washington Carver National Monument, the first national monument dedicated to an African American and the first dedicated to a non-president. He was also posthumously inducted into the National Inventors Hall of Fame, and today the Missouri Department of Agriculture building is named in his honor. George Washington Carver said no individual has any right to come into the world and go out of it without leaving behind him distinct and legitimate reasons for having passed through it. Carver certainly lived by these words. He left behind a legacy of scientific innovation, environmental stewardship, and dedication to helping others. Being born into slavery had every disadvantage imaginable, but he became one of the most respected scientists of his time and laid a foundation for sustainable agriculture that feeds our world today. His life shows us that with curiosity, determination, and a desire to help others, one person really can change the world. Thank you for learning about this remarkable scientist.